3 weeks ago, my friend Matt asked if I wanted to go camping. Since I had wasted my entire summer working, I agreed. I needed a break from chores and my boring office job. As the weekend got closer, Matt kept adding people to our camping trip. Soon, it went from us to 6 people. The SUV I inherited from my mother could fit all of us and our bags if we squeezed in, but I felt like dropping out of the trip. I knew if I did so, then they all couldn't go, because Matt had a smaller car. I'm the type of person that dislikes crowds and prefers to stay indoors. Eddie was coming along and I didn't think he was a bad guy. He was just very loud. I dismissed my feelings knowing that some strife in my life would be good for me. Just because I would be slightly annoyed by a few things that weekend wouldn't make the trip unmanageable. I could sacrifice a little comfort for my friends. We packed everyone into the SUV and started. I will admit, by the end of the 2-hour drive, I was very glad to get out of the driver's seat. Eddie refused to listen to the no-smoking rule, and his constant abrasive jokes made me silently consider driving into oncoming traffic. If it weren't for Sophie distracting him as much as she did, we never would have finished the drive. Me and her were closer in high school. I fell off talking to a lot of people because of my busy schedule and had been worried there would be a distance between us. That wasn't the case. We easily picked up right where we left off as friends that day. I parked the SUV in an empty lot near the start of a hiking trail. I was surprised by the lack of other cars around. I had assumed it would be busier. Matt told us he knew of a great camping spot by the lake, but it was nearly a 2-hour hike. I playfully groaned. We had left after lunchtime, and now we wouldn't get to the site until almost dinner time. It was a 2-hour hike for a normal person. Our group wasn't the most focused or motivated to use our time properly. We all made sure to use the washroom before heading into the woods. Getting all our gear on took at least 10 minutes. I never knew how long a group of people took to drag out a simple task. I kept my mouth shut, knowing there was nothing we could do about it. I stayed silent when Jessie realized she left something in the SUV and asked to go back 5 minutes into walking down the trail. Instead of reaching the campsite at around 4 as planned, we might get there closer to 6. We could be cutting it close to set up while it was still light out. But no one appeared worried. Everyone broke off into groups of 2 as we walked. I listened to Sophie as she caught me up in all the things she had been doing this summer. Since I only worked, I just nodded, letting her talk, knowing my life was too boring to say much about. An hour into the woods, we came across another person on the trail. He had been the only other sign of life aside from the sounds of birds in the trees. Our group caught up to him and the stranger stopped to greet us. He wore a gray baggy sweater, even though it was far too hot for one. It was nearly autumn, but the summer heat hadn't let up. He had a massive camping pack that looked to weigh more than his thin legs should be able to carry. Matt and Eddie were at the front of our group. When the stranger stopped to wave at us, we all stopped for a chat, and to take a smoke break for some. "Are you all just hiking or camping?" the man asked with a smile. He sounded slightly southern, with a warmness to his voice that instantly made him appear trustworthy. Matt nodded down towards the trail. "Camping. We're setting up near the Big Bear tree." He lied. I hadn't been in the area since I was very young, so I had forgotten about the tree until Matt mentioned it. It was a massive tree in the middle of a clearing that someone decided to carve a simple bear face into the bark years ago. It was a good landmark, and near the end of the trail. "That's a good spot even though people do say it's bad luck. I'm just here gathering. I'll stop by the ranger's cabin on the way out." "Have you all checked in yet?" he asked. A mesh bag holding some mushrooms hung from his pack, along with a batch of plastic whistles. He looked over, prepared for anything, let alone a day trip out into the woods. "Do we need to check in?" I asked, unaware. The group gave me a look. I considered we might need to pay a fee to camp, and they all wanted to avoid it. The park runs on donations. Even if you can't afford one, you should let the rangers know you're all here just in case. "Do you have a GPS?" He suggested, the kind smile never fading from his face. "Yes, it's not our first camping trip." Matt stated, a little annoyed. This man was the kind of person he had issues getting along with. He looked too clean to be the kind of person to enjoy the outdoors. Like, he was only foraging to film content for his TikTok account. I glanced down to see he was wearing flip-flops. Seriously, who hiked in flip-flops? The man adjusted his pack, not appearing to be offended by Matt's tone. "Do you all have whistles?" he offered. We shook our heads at the same time Matt pulled out one. Gracefully, the man sent down his pack to take off the whistles to offer them to us. He explained he wanted to buy one, but it was cheaper to buy them in packs, so he handed them out to others he saw in the woods. When he bent down, the baggy collar of his sweater exposed a toned chest for a second. Sophie and Jesse noticed first, and Sophie not so discreetly punched my arm until I followed her gaze to see what got her so excited. To Matt's displeasure, we were all handed whistles. The man knew he was overstaying his welcome and replaced the bag on his back. He winked at the girls, showing he noticed their interest, which caused them to pretend as if they were swooning. I tied the whistle to my belt loop and needed to suffer through the group, teasing me that the man hadn't winked at the girls, but in my direction. Jessie pretended to be upset that Matt gave the stranger the wrong campsite, joking she wouldn't mind meeting him in the middle of the woods at night. We finally found our campsite after a long walk, sweating in the heat. All of us got to work setting up tents and playing around. I had only ever set up a tent twice in my life and needed Sophie to help get all the rods in place. Once it was up, I offered to help collect firewood, but that task had already been covered by Eddie and Ben, who had behaved until then. They did the job halfway until they found branches that looked like swords. That distracted them for a while. Matt disappeared for a while. He came back before dark, holding a bag of items that would mean we were going to have a better dinner than canned beans and hot dogs. Since he went camping more often than all of us, he knew what was edible in the woods. He collected something I had never even heard of until then, called chicken of the woods. It was a fungus that tasted pretty good, sautéed with a few other things he brought along. The sticks Eddie and Ben found weren't really enough to last the night. I helped Matt chop up some larger dry branches with a small axe brought along. I mostly brought wood to him and then took it near the fire instead of doing any of the actual work. Matt appeared to enjoy chopping too much to hand the task over. I thought everything had been going well so far. After dinner, Eddie brought out a joint for himself, and with some pestering from Ben, he grabbed another one to share with the group. I refused when it was passed in my direction and gave Sophie a surprised glance when she took a hit. I've never seen her smoke before. The booze came out next and the group started to get louder, retelling stories from school. A bottle was passed my way and I raised a hand to refuse it again. "Dude, you're not driving. You can have some," Matt said, trying to force the beer into my hands. I had no choice but to take it, but I passed it over to Sophie. "Are you too good for my cheap beer or something?" Matt said in a tone that made everyone stop talking and nervously look in our direction. "What? Number man, you know I've never really drank," I said, trying to calm everything down. "You can have one," Sophie said, holding out the bottle again, trying to get me to take it. I looked over all their faces, confused about how this suddenly became such a big deal. I've never liked the way any alcohol tasted, but normally would have one drink to get people off my case. I also hated what weed did to me, and only smoked it once. Smoking and drinking were simply not my thing. I never thought anyone would ever get offended by something like that. It wasn't as if I was stopping them from enjoying those things. "I don't want one. I don't think it's a big deal," I said, my hands raised in defense. My old friend leaned in, the cold bottle pressed against my arm, and her blonde hair falling on my shoulder. "I think you need to grow up," she whispered. The anger in her voice stunned me for a second. For a moment, only the crackling of the fire was heard. I didn't understand the sudden turn of the mood. I knew it might not be a good idea to continue with the conversation, so I stood up. "I'm heading to bed. It was a long walk for me today," I announced. Matt looked away at Eddie as if they were sharing an inside joke. "What, is being out of the office too much for you?" Ben joked, trying to lighten the mood, but he failed. "Yeah, actually. I'm not outside much anymore, so I'm going to pack it in," I said, and hated how my voice sounded. "I'll see you guys in the morning," I added in a more relaxed voice. I left them by the fire and sat on top of my sleeping bag. It was too hot inside the tent to cover up. My head swam over what all of that was about. I started to question all my actions that day. Yes, I did get annoyed with the smoke breaks, the loud jokes, and how long the hike took, but I never said anything. Was I giving nasty expressions all day that I wasn't aware of? Or was all of this something else? I considered that none of them wanted me to come along but had only used me for the ride. Well, aside from Sophie, but now I wasn't too sure. But why? Was it my full-time job? Or my career goals? Matt was working at his father's shop. Ben was unemployed living with his parents. Eddie was, well, Eddie. He crashed at different places until he got kicked out. Jessie was a waitress, and Sophie said she was doing a lot of social media things and had recently started to get paid for it. None of them worked a 9-to-5 job like myself. But who cared about that kind of thing? Did they all really assume I was looking down on them for their lifestyles? Was I overthinking all of this? Or did all my friends actually hate me? It sucked being in the dark with those questions in your head as your friends chatted and had fun outside. I decided then that I just needed to get through the weekend and then most likely not bother to hang out with these people again if they really did want nothing to do with me. It hurt, but I wouldn't have time to do anything besides work and school when classes started up again. Despite the chattering thoughts and emotions swirling in my chest, I slowly drifted off to sleep, unaware that not just a busy lifestyle would prevent me from seeing my friends again. I woke up in the middle of the night, in the darkness, disorientated to so many different sounds coming from outside my tent. I stumbled outside, taking a full minute to get free and into the cool night air. My eyes slowly adjusted to the moonlight so I could see what was causing all the noise. Ben had stumbled out of his tent and collapsed to the ground near the fire pit, crying out in pain. One hand clutched the side of his head as tears streamed down his red face. Without warning, he started throwing up. I got to him just as he finished emptying his stomach and then curled up in a ball. "What's going on?" Jessie asked as she came outside her tent with a flashlight. "Gross," she whispered mostly to herself when she saw the mess. "Ben?" I had knelt next to him, my hands awkwardly hovering, unsure of what to do. "Don't touch him." Matt snapped when he saw what was going on. I gave him a dirty look and held back a snappy remark. "Is everyone feeling all right?" I asked the small group. "Are you saying I gave us food poisoning?" Matt said, and started to close the distance between us. Well, not on purpose. "Listen, if we know if anyone else is sick, we'll know if it's something we all ate, or just what Ben ate." I tried to explain. Matt was having none of it. He raised a fist as if he was going to hit me. All of a sudden, a noise cut through the dark, causing us to all freeze. Eddie had started to laugh. He tossed his head back, and the sound that came from him chilled me down to the bones. It didn't sound like him. Hell, it didn't even sound human. Did these guys have anything heavier than the joint after I went into the tent? We all stood stunned, unable to move, listening to the awful sound. "It's too loud," Ben whispered on the ground. Both of his hands went to the side of his head to press down as his body rolled back and forth. "Shut up. Shut up. Shut up." Ben's voice started low and then grew louder than Eddie's laughter. He suddenly shot up and took a red-hot log from the fire pit with his bare hands. I grabbed a hold of him before he hit Eddie with it. He didn't even notice his burned hands as I got him to drop the smoking wood to the ground. "I said make him shut up," Ben shouted, and it made Jessie and Sophie take a step back. What happened next was so sudden, it made it impossible for the rest of us to react. A shape came charging out of the woods, making ungodly noises. It ran past us and directed into Eddie, finally silencing his laughter. His body was knocked aside and bounced hard against a tree. The girls screamed, and I jumped back, shocked at the sight. In the moonlight, a large buck stood, dark eyes looking us over as if it knew what we were. Matt acted first. He picked up a bottle and tossed it at the deer in a blind panic. That was a bad idea. The next few minutes were a flurry of movements. The deer charged through the campsite, tearing up tents and nearly crashing into us. It was a miracle no one else had been hit by the crazed creature. It fled back into the woods, dragging Matt's tent behind by a rope that had been caught on its leg. Ben slowly sat down, hugging his knees, looking oddly calm. I stood breathing hard, looking over the damage. We needed to get the hell out of there and fast. I reached into my pocket. Relief flooded my systems when my fingers touched my cell phone, only to have it be taken away, seeing there wasn't a signal. "Does anyone have a working phone?" I asked the shocked group. The girls held on to each other, not moving. They were too frightened to think. I turned to Matt, who had slowly been taking steps towards Eddie's body. I wanted to see if he was all right, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if it was wise to move him. "Do you have one of those satellite phones?" I asked Matt, unaware that would set him off again. "Not all of us are made of money like you," he snapped. I was taken aback. What the hell was with all of these people that day? First of all, that has nothing to do with this situation. And second of all, I'm not. I'm barely supporting myself, I shot back. My stomach rolled from the stress. "This is why I hate hanging out with you. It always goes back to your dead parents," Matt yelled in fury. I stood my mouth slightly open, unable to process any of this. I shook my head as if that would help. Eddie could be dead before the morning. We needed help for him soon. Without a working phone, our best bet was to get back to the SUV. I remembered the man we met on the trail and how he mentioned the ranger station. They should have a radio or a way to contact someone in an emergency. "I'm going to rush back to the SUV. Matt, you know the woods better than anyone. You should go to the ranger's cabin asking for help. Anyone is welcome to come with me back to the car," I offered. Strangely, Jesse and Sophie shook their heads. At first, I thought they were going to go with Matt, but they offered to stay behind at the campsite with Eddie and Ben. I nervously glanced at Ben, who had sat silently since the deer ran off. There wasn't much we could do for Eddie right now. And if Ben snapped, the girls could get hurt, and it was possible the rabid deer would come back. And yet, they both wanted to stay behind. Neither could drive, so it wasn't as if they could go to the SUV instead of me. I accepted their request and borrowed a flashlight to start heading down the trail. Matt was going to collect himself before starting on his way to the ranger station. I had only taken a few steps down the path when I heard screaming in the dark from the campsite I had just left. Against my better judgment, I ran back into the woods only to get cut off by a deer running in front, blocking my way. More screams came from the forest as I helplessly stared down the animal in my way. There was something wrong with the way it looked at me. I stepped to the right, and it took a step to the right. I moved left, and it moved left. The movement made a chill run down my spine. The creature raised a head and let out a long, haunting noise, drowning out the other sounds. My body jumped, and I started to run to what I thought was back towards the campsite. I raced through the woods with all sorts of noises echoing through the trees. Some sounded like the girl's screams, and other noises were something I didn't think anything natural could make. My heart raced as my flashlight beam bounced across the forest floor. I was blinded by fear and didn't see the sudden drop off of a steep hill. I stopped too late and ended up slipping down the slope, rolling, and losing my grip on the flashlight. My body slammed against hard rocks and exposed tree roots. Exposed skin was torn and bruised from the fall. I ended up at the bottom, dazed and in too much pain to move. It still felt like I was rolling for a long time. I knew I needed to move, and yet I couldn't. Through ringing ears, I heard a voice coming from above. "Are you all right?" Unable to speak, I raised a hand with a thumbs up. The moonlight was bright enough to see the outline of the stranger we met on the trail earlier. He was missing his pack and had changed into a darker sweater. "Hang on, I'll get you." I wasn't able to protest before he started down the hill that had taken me out. He glided down as if it was a mastered hobby of his. He stopped above me, leaning over to get a better look at my injuries. "Did you hit your head? Do you think it's okay to move you?" he asked. "Yeah, I'll be fine. We need to get back to my friends. They're in trouble. Weird stuff is happening." I told him and slowly started to sit up as I spoke. I felt a hand wrap around my wrist, and with ease, He helped me back to my feet. To my embarrassment, he bent down on one knee, offering to carry me on his back. "I'm not a koala," I replied to his silent offer. "This way to faster." I hated that he was right. I accepted the suggestion, and with his longer legs, we were up the slope within the minute. My entire body hurt, and I was silently thankful I didn't have to struggle up the hill. "So, Mr. Koala, what's your name?" "I'm Arlen." My face turned sour. "Michiel," I muttered, and started to head back towards where I thought the campsite was. He stopped me and tapped his nose as if that meant something. "I smell your fire pit in this direction," he said, and pointed the other way. We hadn't seen any other campers, so the only fire in the woods should have been made by us. I very faintly smelled smoke, but that could have been because of his suggestion. I followed him, going as fast as my body would let me. "What are you still doing in the woods?" I asked him. With everything that happened so far, I didn't trust a stranger out in the woods. If the deer weren't acting the way they had, I would have assumed all my friends were on a bad trip. Something was going on, and he might have been connected to it. I was ambushed by a feral squirrel. I needed to ditch my pack to outrun it. I was hiding from it until I heard screaming. Arlen explained and looked over his shoulder. "No matter what happened to you tonight, at least it wasn't something that embarrassing." I coughed to hide a laugh. Wrinkles appear at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. Some of the tension of the night broke for a few minutes. I needed some humor to collect my thoughts as we made our way back to the campsite. Any kind of calm disappeared from my chest when we arrived. Trails of fresh blood were scattered throughout the clearing. The fire pit had been trampled, and embers were flung around the site. Arlen walked over to stomp out a few spots that threatened to spread to create a larger fire. Something shone in the moonlight. I bent down and picked up Eddie's lighter, which had been abandoned. Was I in the wrong? I asked myself, unaware I spoke out loud. "What do you mean?" Arlen responded in a patient voice. It was odd having someone ready to calmly hear me out after everything that happened. I wasn't certain if I could fully trust him yet. Either he had nothing to do with all of the strange events, or he wouldn't believe the rabid deer story. "A friend of mine got hurt pretty badly. I left to head back to the car because none of our phones had service. Should I have forced someone to come with me? I mean, what happened after I left? What is even going on?" I shoved the lighter in my pocket and started to bite my thumbnail. It was a habit I thought I had outgrown. "You couldn't force them to come with you if they refused. I wish I had more answers for you. I do find it odd you all didn't have service. Has it been spotty all day?" he asked. I realized our phones had no issues before dinner time after he asked the question. I suddenly felt guilty for standing around talking with fresh blood on the ground and no signs of my friends. My phone had stayed in my pocket even after falling down the slope. I wanted to double-check to see if there was still no service. My heart raced when I saw a single bar on the newly cracked screen. Sadly, the bar was gone the moment I tried placing a call. I held my phone out as far as I could reach, as if that would help get the signal back. I was distracted by the night sky for a second. Faint streaks of light crossed the sky. I didn't think there was a meteor shower that night, and yet a handful shot across the darkness. Arlen reached over and took my phone. I protested a little, but he held it up out of my reach. "I'm taller," he pointed out. The extra height did nothing to help get my connection back. We gave up and I tucked the phone away. I asked Matt to head to the ranger's cabin. I wonder if he left and then something happened to everyone else. Even if he didn't reach the cabin, maybe it would be better to go there to get help than try to find everyone. But I don't know where it is, I said, frustrated over the events of that night. "I'll take you there," Arlen said, and turned to start walking away. "Really?" I said, a bit shocked. Since I met him, his expression has never changed. He was still the friendly person we met on the trail. He wasn't fazed by the sight of blood or finding me at the bottom of a hill. And now he was offering his time to a stranger instead of just leaving the woods. "Yes, why not?" he said, amused by my reaction. "You don't even know us." The words just slipped out. I try to help others when I can, but I rarely ask for anything if it's beyond an easy task. Someone going out of their way for me was such a foreign concept at that moment in my life. I don't know your friends, but I know you. You're a koala in disguise. He joked. This was not the moment for humor, and yet I accepted it. It wasn't as if I could handle any of this on my own. I needed to trust him, at least for now. Before we left the campsite behind, we glanced around for a flashlight. We weren't able to find one, but I picked up the axe Matt had used for firewood. It felt far too heavy, and yet I didn't want to leave it behind. I silently followed behind Arlen, praying our hike to the ranger's cabin would be easy. Things are never easy. We walked for a while. In the dark, it was hard to tell time. I hurt from the fall, and my chest was tight with stress. I gripped the axe handle so hard the rough wood rubbed into my palms. The events of the night ran through my head. No matter what, I couldn't think of any answer to what we saw. If there was something in the forest that made the deer and squirrels go feral, then why did Ben and Eddie get sick? We all ate the same food. Those two drank from different water bottles. If it was a tainted stash, then that didn't explain the deer. Suddenly, Arlen stopped, his body tense. His dark eyes stared off into the woods as if he saw something I didn't. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I was scared the noise might bring trouble. Then a whistle cut through the darkness. I gripped the axe tighter and my head felt light. We caught each other's eyes and he nodded. I grabbed the plastic whistle he gave us and blew on it, answering the call. There was a pause, and the sound was returned along with a distant cry for help. I wasn't sure which of the group it was. I just felt glad we found someone. I started forward towards the whistling sound, stopping only long enough to figure out where it was coming from. Each minute was agony until I saw a figure through the trees. "Ben!" I shouted and lowered the axe. His head turned towards me, his face red and wet with tears. I've never seen Ben cry before. He was always the rock of the group. And now he was stuck to the spot sobbing because he was so glad we found him. "It's so dark here, I got scared. Did you bring Mr. Hoppy?" He sniffled, ribbing his eyes like a child. I had stopped a few steps away from him, confusion seeping into my expression. "Mr. Hoppy?" I asked, getting a very bad feeling over this interaction. "I want to go to bed. It's dark. But I need Mr. Hoppy to sleep," he explained, and large tears threatened to start again. "We're going to the ranger's cabin. Maybe Mr. Hoppy is there," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "No, it's too dark and scary out there. I don't want to be alone. If Mr. Hoppy isn't here, you'll have to help me sleep instead." His hand reached out and took hold of my wrist before I could react. His gripe was so tight I thought he would crush my bones. Still, I couldn't bring myself to raise the axe in my other hand to attack my friend. "Hurry up and join us so we're not alone." To my horror, Ben reached up and took a hawked finger inside his mouth. He started to pull until the flesh tore and ripped away. He didn't have any reaction of pain, as he opened his mouth so wide it looked like his lower jaw unhinged itself. His flesh pulsed unnaturally. Some blood came from the rip, but the wounds healed over, giving him a forever wide-mouthed, gruesome appearance. I started trying to pull away, finding it impossible. His expressionless eyes stared into my own as panic overtook my body. Another ripple ran through his face, and all of a sudden, the flesh on the left side exploded outwards in gore and twisted shapes. It was as if a bloody kind of vegetation was trying to get through his skin and fusing with his flesh and bone. I felt the axe hand get ripped from my hand. Then someone grabbed the back of my shirt with a powerful hand and pulled me backward, as Ben kept a hold of my wrist, extending his arm. With a single swift cut, Arlen chopped off Ben's arm at the elbow. I felt myself get lifted off the ground for a second. Then we were running. Ben didn't follow, but let out a scream similar to the sound the deer made before. We ran until my legs gave out and my lungs burned. I finally stopped, sweat stinging my eyes and my face burning. I felt something on my arm, and disgust rose through my throat when I realized Ben's hand had not let go. Silently, Arlen helped me pry the fingers off my bruised wrist. and then he tossed the arm deep into the woods. I collapsed against a tree. My face was in my hands, and my body shaking. Not only was I mortified over Ben's face transforming the way it had, I was ashamed over my reaction. I had a weapon in my hand. If Arlen hadn't been there, I might have died because of shock. A noise stirred me from my misery. Arlen had started to whistle a song, his back straight and staring off into the woods. He noticed I was staring at him and he stopped. I whistle when I get nervous. He admitted, and for the first time, I saw a hint of stress on his face. I could understand that. But did he really have to pick "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life"? Not the best song for the moment, I commented, trying to stay collected. I think it's the best song for moments like this. Sure, we saw something terrifying, but we got away, right? He pointed out, his smile appearing forced. I was going to agree with him, but something far worse than Ben found us. Due to all the noise we made from running, it could have been following us for a while without us noticing. Hey guys, spar some snackies? The voice belonged to Eddie, but it was all wrong. The words were choppy and unnatural. I stood up, legs shaking far too much to make a run for it. I wished the moon wasn't so bright that night. I wanted to never see what walked through the trees towards us. A deer hobbled along carrying extra weight. Coming out from the base of its neck was the chest of a longtime friend. He hung upside down, arms swaying and fingertips nearly touching the ground. More of the almost flower-like growth circled where they had been fused. The monster stopped walking and stared at us with two sets of eyes. Alone. This time the word came from the mouth of the deer using Eddie's voice. Something cracked as the deer's head started to turn. Slowly, Eddie's upper half rotated around, making him and the deer head trade places. He reached out his arms as if offering an embrace. "You snackies or friendies?" he asked, head jittering with each syllable. The monstrosity charged forward, wanting our flesh. I pressed my body hard against the tree, cursing my body and refusing to react the way I wanted it to. Arlen planted his feet hard on the ground and braced himself. He used the momentum of the creature against it. The Eddie creature realized its mistake the moment the axe blade was planted in the middle of his face. It dug down deep as Arlen pressed his entire body against the handle. His feet were pushed back, digging up dirt. He lost both of the flip-flops he had been wearing, and yet didn't react to the twigs and rocks cutting into his soles. They both stopped, Arlen keeping the monster's body still standing. He backed off, letting go of the handle and letting them both fall. He then leaned down with his hands on his knees, breathing heavily. The monster twitched, and the deer's head started to move upwards as if trying to replace Eddie's. Arlen moved fast. He planted a foot against the creature and ripped the axe free. He brought the weapon down again and again. Splashes of blood flew from the attack, covering the front of his sweater and even spattering across my clothing. He kept hacking until the handle broke off in his hands. His last attack was to drive the wood down deep into the mess of the deer's skull. Silence came over the forest aside from his ragged breathing. He looked over what he had done and lifted his sweater to clean away most of the blood off his face. His eyes landed on me, and then he looked back at the mess at his feet. "Excuse my French, but fuck." He paused to gesture towards the pile of gore at his feet. "All of whatever this is," he finished. "That used to be my friend," I finally answered. The word hung heavy in the air. His expression changed to pity when he looked back down at the mass of flesh and bone. The body twitched, and I worried that it would get back up again. We needed to move before that happened. "We're not that far from the ranger's cabin. Come on." With some gentle prodding, Arlen got me moving again. I hated all of this. I hated how I froze up and how every sound off in the woods made me jump. And I hated not having answers. Arlen stopped for a few seconds, checking the trees and ground as if he was tracking something. He also glanced up at the sky. I wondered if he knew how to get around based on the location of the stars. He noticed being watched and pointed towards a pair of fallen trees. "I've memorized a lot of key locations of the woods, so I know how to get back if I get lost while foraging," he explained. "Are you from around here?" I asked him. This forest was huge. Surely he would need to come here countless times to remember so much of it. Number just a good memory. He shrugged. He was flexing his hands at his side as if they were in pain. Taking down that monster must have taken a toll on him, and he was walking around without shoes. I wanted to offer him mine, but there would be no way they would fit. What kind of people are your friends? I mean, what are they like? Arlen asked as he kept his head directed forward. I knew he just wanted me to talk, to keep me distracted from the horrors we witnessed, but I went along with it anyway. Ben was our rock. No matter what, he was the calm one of the group. If you had a problem, he would be there to listen. But around Eddie, he acts pretty goofy. It's the only time I see him let loose a little. I told him, fully regretting ever agreeing to take everyone camping this weekend. What about the other guy we met? That was one way to put it. My stomach churned thinking about Eddie as the image of his body fused to the deer came to mind. Eddie was never that bright. Kind of annoying if you ask me. I tended to avoid him if I could, but he wasn't a bad guy. Far from it. Super kind, always sharing what he had. He was also good with animals. He found an abandoned and abused donkey when we just started high school. The year he took care of it was probably the best year of that donkey's life. I stopped walking. My body suddenly felt heavy. I didn't want to move. I just wanted to bury myself deep into a hole and never move from one spot again. I felt tears threatening to overtake me as I found myself chewing so hard on my thumb, the tip started to bleed. I'm sorry, I started, my voice uneven. Arlen simply gave me a thumbs up, knowing I needed a few seconds to collect myself. I didn't understand him. He acted so calm and helpful to a stranger. How could he not be a mess after taking an axe to a monster that tried to do God knows what to us? He didn't rush me. It took a minute, but I pushed aside my misery to keep moving forward. Seeing the light of the cabin took a massive weight off my shoulders. I rushed forward, wanting nothing more than to get a hold of a person that could help us. Again, a hand grabbed the back of my shirt and I was dragged aside. I had gotten in front of Arlen, and an odd, serious expression came over his face. He nodded silently, telling me to stand behind him. I listened and mentally got ready as dread filled my chest. If this place wasn't safe, I didn't know if I could handle it. Arlen's hand slowly went for the door. Then all at once he pulled it open while standing off to one side. A person on the other end swung down an axe hard into the ground and then stumbled forward. In a flash, Arlen disarmed him and pinned the stranger to the ground with a knee to his back. "Let me up, you psycho!" the person shouted, his face red with fear and pain. He was deemed to be not a threat, and I helped him off the ground. Arlen picked up the new metal axe and went inside the cabin to look things over. I followed behind him, and the stranger cautiously did as well. I almost got sick at the sight that greeted us. The small cabin had been covered with blood. The headless bodies of the rangers had been left behind by whatever attacked them. I forced my eyes away. My hand covered my mouth in case I got sick. The smell of blood was overpowering. Arlen walked over the bodies and straight to a bulky radio on the other side of the room. "It's broken." The stranger told us. The words made my heart sink more. At least finding another normal person was a good sign. And I was certain a trail led from this cabin to the parking lot. We would be on the right path instead of stumbling around in the woods all night. I had my back turned from the center of the room. I didn't see one of the headless bodies get back up, but I heard it. I spun on my heel, blood racing, terrified to see another one of those monsters. The body stood unsteady feet, appearing like a puppet on a set of strings. Arlen had set down the axe to look over the radio. Everything felt to be in slow motion. A burst of the flower-like fleshy growth came from the chest of the creature. It opened up, revealing a pulsing blue light encircled with countless half-formed hands. By the time Arlen grabbed the axe and took a few steps in our direction, a set of tendrils shot out, aiming for the man beside me. I picked up a wooden chair that had been placed near the door to use as a shield. The flesh of the tendrils hit hard, forcing me back and splitting the back of the chair. It fell from my hands, but I held on to one large, pointed piece. Without thinking, I charged, aiming the end of the wood into the blue light. Countless splinters dug into my hands, and I forced all my strength into plunging my makeshift weapon downwards. The thing convulsed, the back arcing. The light went out, and the growths shriveled up. The body fell back to the ground, taking the piece of wood with it. I stood, breathing hard, looking over what I just did. I guess monsters are easier to deal with when they don't look or sound like your friends. The newcomer stood shell-shocked. Arlen walked over and rolled the other body on its back. The chest started to move, ready to open up like the other one. He brought down the axe a few times, ensuring the creature stayed down. Then our attention was drawn to the stranger in the cabin, expecting answers. "What are these things?" I demanded. He crossed his arms and turned his face away. "What makes you think I know?" he shot back, huffing. I reached over and took hold of a swipe card attached to his belt loop. He was wearing a short white lab jacket and didn't appear to be a hiker. He snatched away his card, knowing his cover was blown. "I can't get you a lot of details." He started appearing nervous. Arlen lifted the axe a little, and the man raised his hands in defense. "I'll tell you what I know. Who are you two? Hikers? Ex-military or something?" he suggested. "A citizen and a koala," Arlen answered, and I wished he dropped that joke. I looked over to him, trying to spot a lie. I did expect him to be at least involved in all of this, or have some sort of military training. He took down the deer creature on his own and found his way through the woods in the dark without any shoes. Was Arlen really just some random person who got caught up in all of this like the rest of us?